welcome everyone. Thank you for signing in. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Barry Cranford. I'm the founder of this fractional consulting community that we've got here. Yeah, we run these sessions, so we're running a bunch of different events and things within the community. I think we've got 4 events currently at the moment on all sorts of different things that are happening and impacting you guys as fractionals. So just trying to get everyone together to do some information sharing, knowledge sharing, and make sure that we can answer all your questions. So joined today by Fergus and Gemma. As I say, we're going to be introducing them very shortly, and then we're just going to look through the highest ranking question, which I'll just put that link out again in a second for anyone that's just joined, and jump straight into it. So Gemma, do you want to kick off to say a few words about yourself?
So hi everyone. As Barry's mentioned, I'm Gemma. I'm a consultant CTO, and I work as a fractional and interim consultant at the moment. I have experience across the Nordics in particular, but also from New Zealand and the United States. I'm most currently in the UK, and I've got quite a strong focus on highly compliant sectors, so anything within finance, insurance, and healthcare. But I actually started out my career in advertising and media, front-end programming. It was a long time ago now. I'm also a certified cloud architect, and I also consult across product and some business-based consulting as well.
Thanks, Gemma. And Fergus, if you could just introduce yourself as well, it'd be great.
Absolutely. Nice to see some familiar faces. Some of you haven't had the chance to meet yet. I guess similar to Gemma, my experience is not only in the fractional camp, but also in the interim camp. I've been doing the kind of consulting CTO type setup for the last 6 or so years now, having left my previous perm CTO role because that was moving over to the States. I guess I describe myself as quite a product or commercially focused CTO, so it's not just the technology aspect, and a lot of I guess kind of what I end up working with clients on is strategy, is kind of thought partnering with the rest of the leadership team, as well as you know, kind of unpicking some of the complex technology problems. Like Gemma, also kind of tend to orientate myself around complex domains, either for the businesses are operating in, or the delivery model for delivering their value prop. So non-standard companies, helping them kind of capitalize on their product market fit, generally early stage, kind of anywhere from first person in their tech team up to about a team of 100, but not really later stage than that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for both of you. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see the link then. So I'm going to dive straight into the top question so far. So Gemma, I'll start with you then. What are some of the common pitfalls to avoid when working as a fractional CTO, and how can they be overcome?
Oh, there's quite a lot, I think, is the answer. But one of the first things is to make sure that you're setting up expectations for the role, I think. So you can't be successful unless you've got a framework on which you're going to deliver, and that is a reasonable framework on which to deliver as well. So I would say key things as a starter for 10 is to make sure, and something I always do as when I'm engaging with clients, is I make sure that they have a clear, or can create a clear kind of understanding between us of what the outputs they're really looking for are. And these should be measurable outputs. And what the tasks are then to break down to then deliver those measurable outputs. Because remember, you've only got a limited amount of time that you can actually be effective in, regardless of whether you're an interim and you're going to be there 5 days a week, or whether that's, you know, fractional and that's maybe, you know, a certain part-time role. I often have contracts where I'm literally agreeing a block of hours or days and spreading those days across a certain time period that I then take as a kind of time materials basis. That's quite a frequent kind of model that I've had to operate in. And the reason that is quite effective is for two reasons. One is that you can then break it down and be completely task driven. And I actually track all my tasks, and I'm totally transparent with any customer about that, into really brutally granular detail. And then also that if, depending on the scenario you've got, if you've got an internal team, then you can organise your time as in leadership around the different meetings and function and kind of leadership functions they will already have in place and help structure that. But if you've got a lot of internal and external dependencies, then obviously it's very difficult to do that. You need some flexibility to offer them back. And in order to be efficient in that scenario, it's better to do it just on a sort of hourly rate and try and organise, if you can be flexible with your time around that sort of structure. So I would say that setting yourself up for success. The other thing is that there's an awful lot of talk in the business world about strategy. And most people are abysmally bad at strategy. They actually don't understand what it is. They don't understand how to be effective with it. That I've yet to find other consultants or our startup founders, frankly, who really understand how functional aspects of delivery and the commercialization of their product actually attaches back to the investment and the returns on the investment that they are really looking for. And as a fractional or an interim, you're really looking at tactical pieces to help them move forward and solve specific problems. You're not going to be successful at anything else because you're not going to be there for long enough, right? Because if you are there for a long time, you start to run into IR35 type compliance issues. Are you really a long-term employee? So there's a certain amount of being realistic in terms of what is going to fit that model as well, and where you can actually drive outcomes and be effective.
Fantastic, thanks, Gemma. Fergus, would you add anything to that?
I guess if we're talking specifically about fractional work, then I'm sure we've all had the tendency, at least in the past, to get kind of sucked into the weeds, or we see a problem, we want to go and fix it. If you've only got a few hours a week or a few hours a month, then that time is you're very time constrained, and it's very kind of scarce resource. So trying to step out of all of the daily or weekly ceremonies and only kind of engaging with the points in the team, whether that's through one-to-ones or leadership team meetings, then like making sure that those points of engagement are really high impact and that you're able to deliver leverage through the points of contact with anyone in the business. I think that's kind of maybe one pitfall. I guess there's also a tendency to there might be a tendency to over deliver if you're thinking about the kind of time constraint or the amount of time that's been negotiated with the client. We all want to do a good job, right? I'm sure we've all pulled the more than 40 hours, more than 40-hour weeks in the past. The tendency to say, I want to do a good piece of work product for this, rather than just kind of time boxing it and saying, right, okay, that's good enough and moving on. Then sometimes that can be a bit of a challenge to square the circle when fitting that into a fractional framework. As Gemma mentioned, IR35 is always a fun challenge. There's, I guess, it's part and parcel of the standard CTO role to have some sort of line management responsibilities and be kind of responsible for the execution org underneath the technology remit. Finding ways that you can still be effective in helping to shape not only the strategy and the direction, but also the execution of that, whilst still kind of maintaining alternative reporting lines or kind of thinking about how you do that best as an external consultant rather than as someone coming into that seat. Then that's another common pitfall that's just kind of rife for complication and confusion, especially in the UK market.
Brilliant. Thanks both. Yes, Mark, keep hearing about IR35. It'd be nice to maybe one day do one of these sessions where IR35 doesn't make an appearance. But yes, it is prevalent in these. Fergus, I'm just want to pick you up on something you said there that I thought was really interesting. This tendency to over deliver. I thought that's a really interesting thing to hang on before I move on to the next one. Do you have any thoughts on how to avoid that tendency? Any kind of practical advice of kind of how do you make sure you deliver only what is necessary or the best bits rather than trying to do everything?
I suspect that it's not going to be the last time that this comes up in this call, but like really effective time management is so important. Gemma was talking about, you know, kind of tracking tasks and being transparent with the clients on that. I think that's true across the board, that if you've got an idea of what needs to be delivered, you know, let's say a company needs a progression framework developing, you know, okay, so that's a well-scoped bit of work. The likelihood is that you're going to get engagement from other people in the organization to help deliver that anyway. But for the bits that you're contributing, then yeah, you might kind of go over a little bit here and there, but you've got a reasonable idea of what good looks like there and kind of what's going to be required to get it from 0 to 1 or a point where you can kind of hand over ownership of that to someone else in the organization. I mean, I guess the more direct answer is anticipate a bit of flex. So if you say you're billing by the hour, anticipate some of those hours coming in a bit short and some of those hours coming in a bit long. If you're billing by the day, then anticipate some of those days coming in a bit short and some of those days coming in a bit long. At the end of the day, you're looking at delivering value to the customer, and that should be much more focused on impact and leverage that you're providing the business, being able to, you know, talk about those high level objectives that you're looking to solve for them over a month, 3 months, 6 months, rather than the day-to-day tasks that are being delivered. So if you're not focusing your value prop and your offering at that level, then ultimately you're going to end up with negotiating on what the kind of granular task deliveries are. Which is only going to create more churn for you and the client on both sides.
Brilliant, thanks. Okay, thank you both of you for that then. Moving on to the next question then. If anyone's got any specific comments, questions, please feel free to put them in the chat if they are questions on the answers that have come up. Otherwise, we'll use this Slido to go on to the most popular questions. So we've got a series that have got 4 thumbs up. I'm going to pick one here. The most common use cases for fractional CTO work. Maybe if you could give like a couple of use cases that you've each been brought in on, speak about them, maybe 30, 60 seconds, and just a light overview. For anyone coming into this that is like an aspiring fractional, that is a new fractional, that wants to learn more about that, just to give an overview of the variety of things you've been brought in on. Gemma, if I could ask you first again, that'd be great.
It varies quite widely, I think, for me. So there's a kind of typical areas that businesses will be focused on. So if they're in those sort of early kind of scaling stages, they've just had a venture capital raise, there will be sort of inevitable problems with hiring at speed. That's always a key focus area. They will also have technical debt, almost certainly, either that they are having to do the initial jump from an initial kind of MVP based proposition to full enterprise scale. I work a lot in the B2B sector. I'm dealing a lot with big corporates. So the expectations and the jump there is huge, frankly. It's also an entirely different skill set that you're looking for very often from your teams. So that transition is quite hard for a lot of businesses. Kind of typical things will sit around, okay, engineering efficiency, we need to drop our infrastructure costs by 30, 50% or whatever it is. We need help to sort of scope out what our international hiring strategy actually needs to look like, what's realistic. you know, how we can consider our sort of cost and budget control, etc. So those will be sort of key functional operational pieces. If you're looking at earlier stage business, it tends to be much more hands-on. So you maybe have a team to manage. You're really sitting, to be honest, in a sort of kind of engineering manager capacity. I tend not to get so many of those roles over the last year or so. I've been much more focused in the sort of more strategic scale-up space. But certainly I've had my share of doing those pieces of work. And I suppose the final kind of areas really are sitting within the kind of product space. And this is kind of typically areas where so a lot of product professionals who are sort of sitting in that kind of CPO or product director roles. They've often come from design backgrounds, they've often come from marketing backgrounds, commercial kind of backgrounds. They have relatively limited engineering knowledge and capabilities. So when you have a demand for an API platform, development, procurement, those kinds of very heavy infrastructure pieces, I've certainly worked on a number of those sorts of projects and requirements. And I suppose a typical scenario is one I worked on recently for an insurtech in the United States. They had an initial proposition and customer base. They already had a view in terms of where they wanted to go strategically. They were about to spend $10 million on a huge platform procurement and development. So they wanted to know whether they were going to get value for money in terms of that procurement. They wanted to understand the competitive space as well better than they had. They didn't have those kind of enterprise software skills within the existing team either. They were actually insurance agents who built their own enterprise software. So someone to actually scope out not just what the architecture will need to look like, but in terms of the entire commercial proposition and how they move forward and monetize and making suggestions on their pricing approaches and that commercial piece as well. So I would say it can vary quite a lot. And then you've got all the pieces that fall out of that. So actually defining your SLAs as a business, which of course need to mature with the proposition, or your security, or your compliance, that sort of sit around that, you know, those inevitable kind of components that fall out of all of that. So yeah, it can vary quite a lot.
Okay, before I come on to you, Fergus, Gemma, I'm intrigued, right? So there's a huge variety of pieces, all sorts of different sizes and involvement. Any favorites? Anywhere you're like, if you know the email comes in and you're like, there's that pillar project, that one that you're like, yes, that's the best one. And anything that's sort of top of the list for you?
I think for me, because I've also done outbound sales and business development and built my own products from scratch. So I think for me, I'm really looking for propositions in an ideal world that require a strong commercial capability. You know, so I think that's really where I'm good. And also quite enjoy some of the early stage stuff. I think having a challenge of bigger kind of organizations, you know, different problems, frankly, you know, in the sort of when you get to that sort of scaling stage, you're doing functionally with more people, you're less hands-on into the detail in the same way. And I think for my own sort of professional interest and development at the moment, that's sort of where I'm excited. But that's not to say that I don't miss actually sitting down and building stuff. And you know, I still do sit down and build things at my weekends, and you know, have other CTOs that look at other projects with. So I think it's very much dependent on you and your background and your skill set and your capabilities and what excites you and you know, and how you may want to sort of develop professionally, really.
Brilliant, thanks, appreciate that. Fergus, is there anything you'd add, any kind of additional use cases that you've been brought in on?
Yeah, so I think you know, a lot of what Gemma touched on there was, I guess, kind of bringing external objectivity into a business that's wanting to check their blind spots or recognize that there might be unknown unknowns when they're thinking about strategy or how they maneuver from a technology perspective. So that's definitely like a big value add that you also kind of build up more of that as you spend time in the fractional and consulting space, because you get to see many more businesses that are maybe facing some of the same sort of challenges than you would necessarily see in permanent roles. You know, you're more likely to have been in you've gone through that journey with one business through more inflection points, but you're less likely to see the same sort of challenges being addressed from different angles in the same sort of stage businesses. So I think that's one aspect. You're able to bring more evidence-based recommendations in terms of saying, well, this has worked for these businesses, this hasn't worked there. I think the common themes are X, Y, and Z. Again, kind of mapping that back to what's unique about the fractional work rather than the kind of broader consulting sphere. There's, I think, typically like early stage businesses that don't need or can't afford what we might consider a qualified CTO. That's quite often a like kind of compatible model for fractional work, because they only need a day a week in order to make sure that their strategy and the execution that goes with that is kind of on track. To Gemma's point, then sometimes there's quite a lot of engineering management activity there in terms of getting the team effective, getting them kind of delivering in a really kind of high performance way. Then there's categories that might fit later stage businesses. For instance, if the incumbent CTO is lacking some experience or some skill sets to deal with an upcoming inflection point, then bringing someone that's dealt with those inflection points for the businesses in the past, then that can be a really valuable addition to the leadership team. Equally, if there's just like an overflow of CTO-shaped tasks that the company's needing to deal with at any one time, then having some overflow capacity there to be a kind of trusted pair of hands to be able to deal with large-scale initiatives that maybe couldn't be delegated within the team, then they're also good compatible sets of challenges that fit a more of a part-time model rather than needing someone in full-time.
Got it. Great. Thanks. And Mark's just posted a question on this then. Would you rather work with a total greenfield project or a project where things have been built out already, and why?
I'll let Fergus go first.
Personally, I enjoy the slightly later stage projects, not totally greenfield. Just maybe because I've done a fair amount of the greenfield work before, so I like to kind of mix things up a bit. Having said that, I do enjoy the ambiguity of early stage businesses, so I'm less likely to work with later stage scale ups or more kind of enterprise businesses where there isn't an element of uncertainty or trying to kind of define direction alongside the execution of it.
Love that. How about you, Gemma?
I think sort of in a similar way to Fergus, in that I have done quite a bit of the early stage, and I think you need to cut your teeth on that. It's bloody hard, actually, and it teaches you a lot very, very quickly. It's really completely different from being an employee at any point, especially if you own the business. That is really something different from just being the contributor to somebody else's business, I would say, quite strongly. So, and I've certainly sat on both sides of that. So I think greenfield, if it's somebody I know, if they are a second time founder, and I've seen them have it, they are established and I've seen that they are effective, then absolutely I would certainly consider it within certain kind of framework. Depends on the scenario, right? But to be jumping into someone without that experience it's really a huge learning curve for them, actually, and at this point in my career, I'm keen to just be in that kind of scale up, larger, different challenges, I suppose. I think Fergus mentioned this as well, and I think if you've got a kind of a length of experience, and all of you on the call, I'm sure, will relate to this sort of feeling, that you do start to see a lot of the different problems within the same sorts of contexts. All right, so you're jumping in, you're thinking, oh, yeah, this looks familiar. Seen this one before. Here we go again, right? You know, and professionally, and especially in engineering, you want to constantly be learning. You want to constantly have something to solve. You want to be constantly challenged, right? If you're really passionate about your role. So, and you know, there's a whole motivator for being in this kind of discipline. So, you know, you tend to want to kind of evolve your challenges over time and at least tackle something that draws on your experience, which is maybe unfamiliar in terms of how you solve it. So, yeah.
Brilliant, thanks. So both of you liking that uncertainty, new side of things. Mark, I hope that answers your question. And Pat, seeing you've got a question as well for Gemma on hiring. Gemma, you mentioned helping with hiring. Can you say more about how a fractional CTO can help here?
So I think hiring is also about forecasting, and most early stage businesses are pretty bad at this. Actually, they if you haven't got a lot of delivery experience, then actually mapping out hiring can be tricky, or a new kind of skill that you need to learn pretty quickly. So I would say that the first thing in terms of hiring is to being able to help the organization map out not just what they need in the short to medium term, but what they may need in the longer term, and setting out some kind of forecasts for that. Obviously, you need to be able to define first what your end-to-end solution is going to look like, what your product looks like even before that. Otherwise, how do you know how you're going to solution it? And there's always a lot of uncertainties around those aspects, I would say, especially in the fractional world where you're coming in and consulting. So those things have to have some kind of definition in order that you can actually start to map out what your hiring picture is going to look like. And then I think in terms of how I normally break it down with businesses is that the internal existing staff, they will be taking on the day-to-day line management. So one typical role I had last year was I had a VP of engineering sitting underneath me, and then I had 5 engineering managers. So they will be doing the day-to-day management. So I will take either the initial screening or the end interview, and then the other stages will be taken on by my colleagues. So you can help to kind of affect those decisions and make recommendations and help identify certain skills that are required, but essentially it's not going to be you who's doing the day-to-day line management, because that's not within the IR35 framework. Right, you can't take that on and still be a contractor, so or be seen to take that on and still be a contractor. So but you can definitely relieve significant amounts of pressure on the team. It's very time consuming with hiring, as I'm sure you all have experienced. So those would be my top tips.
Fergus, would you add anything to thank you, Gemma. Fergus, would you add anything there?
I suspect kind of tapping into our respective existing networks as well for talent is usually at least a value add, if not an expectation of kind of going into new teams, and then also kind of bringing best practices and being able to establish really effective hiring processes, for example. Then I think that speaks to the point that Gemma was just making there. They're the typical things that I would expect to see in fractional engagements or in consulting engagements. I think also sometimes there are kind of education pieces around, for instance, hiring for the skills that you need rather than the skills that you want, or more kind of gut feel hiring, being able to introduce ideas like scorecards that maybe haven't been in businesses before. So that being able to bring some of those more novel concepts to a business and introduce those as ideas, then quite often there's a lot of value to be gained there.
Great, thanks, Pat. Does that help? Did you have any other follow-up questions on that? That's good. Thumbs up. Okay, mate, brilliant. And Mark, I'll come back to your questions towards the end. I'm just going to see if I can pick off a few more from this Slido thing first. So we talked a little bit about what makes you successful in a fractional or interim CTO role. It's come up in answers to a few of the questions there, but anything that you could say to tackle that question head on? What makes you successful in a fractional or interim CTO role, and how do you define success? Fergus, I'll start with you this time. That's right.
Sure. So what I would typically do for any new engagement is to do a bit of discovery work up front, and typically off the back of that, I will kind of produce a short report, maybe under the headings kind of platform, product, people, process, just to outline the current state of play for the business and get on the same page with the founders or with the exec team. And I found that to be a really useful vehicle for having more objective conversations about where my time might be best spent when working with the business. And you kind of treat that discovery bit of work as independent, right? And I saw that there was a question on the slide about fixed price deliverables, and I have done that before where it's just been that delivery work, and then you hand that over. It's almost like kind of internal DD on the business, and then being able to then build off of that to say, well, we could run initiatives X, Y, and Z. It might be that we want to introduce more data-driven decision-making within the business. Okay, what does that look like? What sort of time frame are we looking to deliver that over? It might be that we're needing to introduce new capabilities into the business. Sometimes you're going into the business and they don't really have a mature product function, or they don't have a mature data engineering function, or some of these other things, and you're then going to get the business from 0 to 1 so that they can then kind of carry it on from there. So being able to pick out some of these high level deliverables early on, and then align with what the expectations are around what those deliverables might look like, then typically I would say that's a really solid foundation to be able to measure success, because you're all aligned on what success is going to look like at the end. And when you get to that point, then it makes for a much easier conversation about what the exit process looks like as well. At that point you're able to say, well, okay, we've completed what we set out to achieve. Hopefully it's not just within those buckets of those initiatives. Kind of we've left the business in a better state than it was before as well on a number of different fronts. But at that point, then you've got a really kind of clear way to get out of the business and hand over to either the existing team that you've upskilled, or maybe you've hired a replacement as part of that as an incoming perm CTO. Then that's quite often another natural exit point.
Can I just ask a few questions that make sure I've got that correct? So the short report that may be under the headings platform, product, people, and process. Did I get that right? So how long does that discovery piece take, and how might you approach that? Like, obviously it might range in time, but roughly how long, and how would you go through understanding and honing in on these 4 areas?
So it ranges, I guess. As with any sort of due diligence, you can it's how long's a piece of string, right? And quite often, if you do start working with that client, then you might go back and challenge some of the assumptions that you've made earlier on as things become clearer, or you build up a more comprehensive picture. And then pro tip there is to be proactive about communicating where some of those assumptions may need to be revised, or make sure that the client's clear on what new information has come to light. In terms of kind of information gathering, then it's typically speaking to people within the organization, to key people within the organization. A lot of that is with the existing leadership team or the founders, but it'll also be with key people within the technology function or product function, probably also from the commercial side as well, just to understand what, in a very objective way. It's not passing judgment. You're not saying you're doing all of this wrong, or these are superpowers. It's about just taking a snapshot of where the business is today. This is what the delivery process looks like. You might include some kind of benchmark data to say the team is currently releasing once a week, However, great industry standard is multiple times a day. So we might look to increase the release frequency there, or there are external constraints which are holding the team back from being able to deliver project X, Y, and Z. There's a lack of skill set in this area, which seems to be required for the business to succeed on these fronts, highlighting some of these concerns, kind of, I guess, painting a picture of where some of the blind spots might be without knowing exactly how much context of this already exists within the business. So the idea is to just kind of brain dump what your views are as an experienced CTO in this field, and then use that as a kind of a leveler to have constructive conversations with the founders or with the exec team on whether that's an accurate picture, and if so, which things might need focusing on from a tactical perspective to help move the business on.
Great, thanks, Fergus. And Mark just added a question as well. This discovery sounds like what I would call a tech assessment, which is used as the foundation for a tech strategy. Is this what you mean?
Yeah, I don't think it's limited to just technology, though. I guess you're looking at it from a business perspective, and being able to maybe highlight the adjoining factors as well. Maybe strategies are a core part of it, right? There's a clear OKRs framework where business goals are communicated on a quarterly basis, and they're cascaded down into the functional groups. That's something that you could include in the discovery doc. Equally, if there are a whole bunch of dragons in the technology function, then you'd want to be spending a lot of time highlighting those in whatever you put down in the assessment.
Great, thanks, Fergus. Gemma, I'll come to you now with the original question, which is what makes you successful in a fractional or interim CTO role? How do you define success for you personally?
I think we've mentioned before, and Fergus also touched on this as well, just in terms of setting expectations and how you define sort of outcomes and tasks before you even begin. But it's quite interesting when you think about due diligence piece and making that initial assessment. Often, as a fractional or an interim, you're being called in because there is something seriously wrong. They are struggling, right? There would be, if they had an effective CTO on board, you would not be required. So often in those scenarios, you need a very high level of EQ, frankly, to be able to go in and make a realistic assessment of what actually needs to be done in terms of outcomes, in terms of tasks, and how to try and support the team and really solve some of the problems that they have. I've spoken to a number of investors recently, and I've done due diligence pieces myself, and often where previous due diligence, if I can even say that word, pieces have actually failed. And this is because they've come back and really impressive CVs, right, who've done this, taken on these pieces, and come back with very kind of generic results. And that's partly because the executive coming in fears litigation. So they don't wish to, present anything that might be contentious, that the staff themselves have necessarily not got the political motivations to expose serious problems, right? They may have motivations to want to hide those serious problems. They may fear losing their jobs. They may fear their jobs changing. That's often a very common scenario. That's the inevitability of a very fast-paced kind of startup scenario as well. You're having to evolve very quickly and look at often quite strong strategic pivots, right? Whether that's product or the execution has failed, or something pretty key in actual fact. So I think whilst initial assessments can be helpful, and you should of course be doing those, that you have to kind of understand where people may be defensive and be asking quite searching questions with senior leadership to make an assessment of what people may be defensive about and whether you're really getting the right information. Because if you can't get that information, if you can't make an accurate assessment, how on earth are you really going to solve the problem for them, actually? So, and this is also where you need to think about why you're being engaged and who is engaging you. Is it the founders? Is it the execution that has failed and the founders are trying to hide it? That could be one scenario, right? You know, they don't want to really expose that to the investors. And have you been hired by the investors, right? Who may be worried about this, and you know, so there's a certain amount of understanding. Okay, how can you politically set things up and collaborate with those people who are in that influential position to make sure you're getting the right information and you really are effective there, and can then define those tasks and those outcomes appropriately that you can actually really help them to solve that problem. Right? You're always going into a capacity where you know you're very genuinely motivated, you really want to have an effect and impact, right? But sometimes the dynamic of those scenarios can be very sensitive, and you need really to think that through a bit carefully and think about it in that context if you really want to get the output, I would say. So I think my biggest learning from working in this early sort of stage space is often how early change resistance is built in, and the inevitable kind of politics that will sit around that, and you need to be very sensitive to that as a fractional and interim, I would say.
So it sounds like almost you need to do an initial discovery piece for the discovery piece that you then need to do. How do you do it? How do you kind of get there? Are you going in somewhere and you sort of, maybe you get this early feeling that there is that defensiveness, or you might come across it. You know, how specifically would you approach that and talk around that?
So this gets into the politics of the board and board meetings, and I think that you need the investors on your side ultimately, you know, and well, frankly the founders, right? They're also the key investors. You know, the whole construct of what you are delivering to is to get them value. Right, get them a return. They want to make a financial return. The founders have not just sweated their, you know, own man hours into it. They've often sweated huge amounts of their own capital into it. You know, that's a personally risk exposing position for them to be in. The investors have done the same. So you need to have a kind of a position where you can look to be collaborative, to be supportive, and any good consultants coming in and going, okay, these are your choices, but it's your choice, right? These, you know, and here's the information in a digestible form for you to be able to make a constructive decision here that's appropriate for you and your business. You're handing that control back at every point, right? Yeah, I don't own the business. It's only for me to come in and facilitate and to offer those choices. So you're thinking about, it's like that often talked about sort of agile concept of the servant leader, really, in a kind of way, because you're there to sort of facilitate something for them, right? So I think it's about having those conversations and asking up front, you know, is there, do they have any concerns that this information may not be transparent? Are the team feeling insecure, right? So making sure you're drawing out that information up front before you go in and start making those assessments.
Amazing. Okay, brilliant. Okay, so Mark, I'm going to circle back then to your questions. So Gemma and Fergus, are there engagements that you will refuse to take? And if so, what kinds of engagements would they be?
Should I go first? Which engagements would I refuse to take? I think a big part, Gemma was touching on it there as well, with the founder and board dynamic. You know, if it looks like the founders are not, or you know, I guess founders / CEO, it'll depend on the business. If it looks like they're not going to set the engagement up for success, or they're not clear on what the success measures might be for an engagement, then I'd probably walk away at that point. I think also if there's if there's not an opportunity to learn something new, or if there's not an opportunity to kind of grow through that role, then I'd probably be less motivated to take that, or to at least offer, you know, kind of a considerable amount of time for those sorts of engagements. That, I guess, that would be my two criteria. I'm always keen to continue learning. One of the reasons for getting into this was to be able to see more companies than I would otherwise, and how they approach different problems in different industries, and with, you know, different people in play, and being able to do that in an effective way, where you're all pulling together. There might be healthy tension there. You know, I'm not saying that I wouldn't engage with a dysfunctional leadership team. But that's a challenge that we can help with, right? We can go in and help drive cohesion and alignment at all stages of the business, and including at the board level. You know, if the board need to build their own confidence in the decisions that have been made within the business, or the direction that the business is heading in, then again, that's something that we can sometimes offer a relatively unique perspective on, versus someone that's embedded within the team. So that would be my kind of two criteria, I guess, for disqualifying engagements or disqualifying candidate clients.
Great, thanks, Fergus. Gemma?
So generally, I've turned down anything which looked like it might touch on sort of IR35 type challenges, of course, but also I think anything where I simply think that they just need a kind of a lower level role, to be honest, where they need a lead software engineer and they need a project manager, and they can do that significantly cheaper than they can hiring me, you know, and maybe have that person in actually full time. You know, and so they have really not understood what the CTO role is and how it affects, you know, the business, and what the requirements of that role and that fit for them at their stage of business that they're at, right? So I have turned down roles where I think simply believe they can do something for less cost and in a more practical, short to medium term solution, and then I might. Not that I can't do those things, but am I really the best fit given my level of experience? And is it the right role for me in terms of the value that I'm looking for or wish to add? I think also anything where they are looking for kind of mid-level managers as well, but that kind of fits into the same bucket, I would say. You know, if you need a head of engineering, and that person needs to be there day to day. Again, that's also a cost issue, right? And also it's about the sort of size and stage of business. You know, there are kind of stage we've mentioned previously on about, you know, different stages of business and what you're sort of motivated to work with or for, you know, at certain points of your career. So I think there is also an aspect to that as well. I think you fundamentally, as a consultant, you know, your role is to be to help you know, inform that person's decision. And that is also at the very point of very first engagement, right? And to be completely honest and transparent about that. And I'm not being honest and transparent if I'm not saying, okay, I think you could solve this in a simpler, more cost-efficient manner, you know, with a different skill set, and opening up my network. I'm always, you know, if it's just a different sort of technical stack, I would also pass that on to someone who's more familiar with it, right? You know, so being able to just facilitate that for someone is also a good relationship builder, because ultimately you build your network over time, and you know, those connections people will remember if they remember that you were helpful for this or that thing, right? So that's also quite important when you think about these engagements as well.
Great, thanks both. On the subject of networking, we have our first power networking event tomorrow. I'm not sure if that brand's going to stick, but basically it is a event where you can come on board and just meet a load of people very quickly. So it's only for the fractional community, and it'll be like a 60-second introduce. So just a series of icebreakers. If anyone's free, then feel free to sign up to that. So Frank has added a question here. So I joined late, so apologies if it's already covered. I don't think it has been, but How do you communicate and at what cadence with your clients? I.e., do you produce a written update email each week? Is it progress against OKRs or something else? What does the structure of the report look like? Any thoughts or comments on that? Sorry, Gemma, I'll start with you on that one.
I think it depends on the nature of engagement and what you set up. What I would say, though, and this is quite important, is that you make sure you keep as much written notes and documentation as possible, right, for every conversation meeting that you have. And that's because you don't ever want to be in a situation where you are not anything other than transparent with the people that you're working with, and that you have any kind of confusion over what you have executed and what decision was taken and when. Right, and the nature of startup environments is they are often chaotic. They're often people who have not got the right background and experience necessarily for what they've just transitioned into. You know, there's a lot of first-time founders, particularly over the last few years. That's been quite much more normal. Or people coming from sort of business domain areas and then moving into software-based, technologies. You know, there's scenarios there where you might be kind of professionally a bit vulnerable if you haven't actually done that kind of administration piece to make sure that you are really, keeping very clear communication and documented communication with the people that you're engaging with. And that's, not just between you and whoever's engaged you, but it's also between you and the teams you're going to be ultimately handing over to, right? This is also very important, right? So that have completely smooth continuity, so that when you're stepping away from that role, it's an easy transition, right? So that's also how you may be remembered for the next role as well. So making sure that those handovers are really as smooth as possible, and then you're adding as much value as possible there as well.
Can you speak to what they might look like? Would that just be an email, like following a conversation? Or I know there's increasing like transcript tools for meetings and things, but Gemma, any specifics that you've, specific sort of things that you would recommend doing that?
So I always have note-taking generally, I think, and then reporting and report writing, that will depend on the requirements of the role and what's agreed up front. So sometimes I will write, if it's agreed up front, that I will write a summary and share that with the leadership team. Other roles have required frequent OKR updates or weekly OKR updates. Other kind of reporting that you may have to need to engage and aggregate from the teams. All right, so it just varies really depending on the role, to be perfectly honest, but that's always something that's agreed up front as well. I mean, I've written PowerPoint documents, Excel forecasts, it's just very much dependent on the tasks and the outputs required.
Great, thanks, Fergus. Would you add anything to that at all?
I think if we're talking about skills to be successful as a fractional, then being able to adopt to ways of working in various different organizations is a big one, right? And being able to streamline your way into whatever their weekly cadence is for reporting, whether that's weekly updates, whether it's OKR updates, whether it's communicating over PowerPoint presentations, then like they're all elements of making sure that you're adopting to the culture in a compatible way. You might be bringing suggestions on how you can improve the knowledge transfer and information flow within the leadership team or across the wider organization as well, but you want to be doing that in a compatible way to the wider organization. You don't want to be coming in saying, well, I'm set in stone, this is the way that I work, this is the way I write reports back to the business. It doesn't look like anything like any of the other C-level reports delivered to the CEO, but this is my way of doing it, because then you're just kind of cutting across the grain for no particular reason. So I think finding the most effective way of communicating that information back to the organization in a way that it's going to be kind of highest utility value is a big part of getting the wheels turning early on in the engagement and making sure that you're hitting those points and kind of being able to start right on an effective engagement.
Brilliant, thanks guys. Frank, I hope that that answers your question there. Anything else that you wanted to add or ask specifically on that, or is that?
No, that's all good. Thank you very much.
Beautiful. Okay, I'm just going to pop a document there. You might all want to click on it and add your LinkedIn emails, just in case you do want to share details or connect with anyone else that was on the call. Obviously, you can always add them later. But just one final question that I think Mark popped up there early on the Slido, and we had a bunch of thumbs on. And it's a classic one that comes up again, like R35 on every fractional call we do. Any tips on finding new roles? Anything that you can share? Any secret sauce that you've got there for how to build new relationships?
Shall I start? So I think right now it's not a great time, if I'm brutally honest, to be a fractional, and that's because there's been a bit of a market downturn. So I think if you are one of sitting in technical leadership and you don't have a problem with being hands-on, and you can pick up some hands-on roles, you know, in between CTO, more executive kind of contracts, then probably you'll be okay. But the market is really very slow at the moment, and that's fundamentally because all the follow-on funding, sort of your Series A, B plus, has dropped off quite heavily. There's still quite a lot of activity in the early stage private markets, but typically those businesses pre-seed to seed, they don't have a lot of money to play with. And the other thing to really point out is that fractional and interim, it's very much a British and American thing, actually. You know, I go back to Norway, I lived there for 8 years, I was in New Zealand for 6 years. I mean, you'd just be laughed out of the room. And there's actually labour laws which prevent a lot of interim and fractional roles from even being considered. It's also generally resisted by a lot of the investors, established investors over there. They wouldn't even consider not having somebody on board and not maintaining those roles within their contractual obligations, which are really very strong in those markets, in a way that you have much more flexibility over here, right? So I think when you're sort of considering that, you have to also consider the context of what you're trying to do, and that it is actually quite hard. I think in terms of looking for it, you need several channels. I think some engineering leads, they network a lot with each other, and they can find roles, you know, that way. That's not been very successful for me, to be honest. Most of my kind of job roles, they either come via recruiters or actually via my founder and business networks. And I'm a member of several business networks. I've just joined a couple more this week. I'm a member of the InsurTech Association. I've also joined Startup Bootcamps network as well, for example. So, and I've got a list of others. And I'm constantly networking through those. I'm going to Stockholm next week to actually do several days of meetings over there. So I think the best approach is really just to have some different channels that you are using. I mean, I even know people who use professional sales tools, get the CRM and CRM out and Sales Navigator, and start profiling people, and not be afraid that you're going to be reaching out a lot, as I'm sure anyone who's done any kind of sales and marketing knows. There's the volume of outreach against the amount of kind of opportunities you get back is obviously quite a big gap. So that you have to just not be afraid to sort of keep plowing away across these different channels in order to find those kind of leads and opportunities, and be flexible about how you negotiate those things as well.
Great, thanks, Gemma. Gemma, if you wouldn't mind popping any of those recommended business networks on the doc. I know Mark's asked there on the doc that we shared, and Mark will try and get those across to you afterwards. Right, I think we're just on time, unfortunately. So thank you so much, everyone that tuned in. Massive thank you to Fergus and Gemma. We'll follow up with everyone and drop a little note there for feedback. So really, really always just interested to hear from you guys. But no, other than that, as I say, I recommend putting your LinkedIn details down and networking as much as you can, sharing as much contacts as much as you can, and we'll see you at the next one.
Cheers, guys. Thank you very much.
Thanks all.
Cheers.